I've been trying for a while now to figure out an opening for this review, but instead of some big setup that's trying to sound grandiose or profound, I'll just be upfront with my point. Super Mario Bros. May just be the most important video game in the history of the industry, especially in North America. Even if you don't think it's the most important one, then you can't deny the impact it's had of launching the most iconic series in the industry and by its biggest developer. Mario is the biggest icon in gaming, rivaled only by Pac-Man. Not only that, but he has been now for 4 decades. If all goes to plan, then this review will go up on September 13th, 2025, which is exactly 40 years since the original Japanese release date. And if not, it'll probably be released around the US anniversary in October. I've said before that 30 years is a huge milestone for works of art and entertainment, especially those that have stood the test of time. At this point, Mario 1 has done that, and then did a third of it again. It's not the oldest game, nor is it the oldest successful one, but for its scale and creativity it's shown for its time, and how much of a milestone release it still is, I think it's a very special anniversary. This is why I wanted to give the game a full and proper me-styled analysis to talk about how well it's held up over 4 decades. Super Mario Bros. Was directed and developed by Shigeru Miyamoto. Miyamoto has gotten his start in game design back in 1981 when he originally made Donkey Kong, which is generally considered the first ever platformer. Since then, that game's protagonist, Jumpman, or as he's known today, Mario, became Nintendo's most reoccurring character and one that Miyamoto would be heavily involved in the progression of. By 1983, Mario Bros. Would release in arcades. This was made as Nintendo preparing to strike into the console market. As Miyamoto was developing new ideas with platformers like Donkey Kong, and side-scrolling gameplay with games like Excitebike and Kung Fu, it got the ball rolling on the idea of a much more expansive side-scrolling platformer with bigger levels and more dynamic movement. With these ideas and many more set, Miyamoto, alongside his longtime development partner and primary artist Takeshi Tezuka, and many other programmers and artists, would develop Super Mario Bros. For the Nintendo Famicom. Additionally, due to the state that Atari left the North American console market in, retailers were not convinced that dedicated game consoles could be successful anymore. When bringing the Famicom to America, Nintendo had to readjust their strategy, instead marketing their new Nintendo Entertainment System as a toy with Rob the Robot and a clock, being positioned as a device that could play arcade-like games or simple sports games at home. Due to how much a lot of this information was diluted or blurred over time, I personally can't confirm or deny if Mario 1 was a launch title for the NES. I don't think it was, but if anyone has a reliable source for this, I'd appreciate you sharing it. The sources I found went back and forth between being a launch title on October 18th, releasing later that month, or a month or two later, and even some speculating it came out in early '86, which I don't think that's right either. Regardless of when it came out, Mario was the big push to revive confidence in the home console market in North America, cementing that the NES was not just a game-playing device, but would contain bigger and more expansive games than anyone has ever seen prior, with the exception of maybe some PC stuff. It's this story that really gave Mario 1 the status as the game that saved the industry. Realistically, a story that's only partially true. Asian and European territories never had the same console crash of 1983. That said, this game was a huge success everywhere that would define the industry going forward. After Mario 1, the NES took off as a titan of the industry. Magazines and public press conferences would be made and held to give news and reviews and make people constantly anticipate what was coming next for the industry. Competitors like Sega and later Sony and Microsoft would enter the ring to compete with its success and take market share from Nintendo. As cliche as it sounds to say, the rest truly is history. The industry then grew into what we know it as today. With it being 40 years since then, I feel like there's a lot to say about the game itself. The game that really started a revolution, and for the full authentic experience, I'm playing for this review on the original NES with an original cartridge. Yeah, the one that also comes with Duck Hunt included, which was the bundle inclusion with the console for most of the NES lifespan. It wasn't the original bundle that would be 2 separate cartridges with Duck Hunt and Gyromite. More evidence, at least to me, that Mario 1 didn't quite make the launch, but that doesn't really matter at this point. What's interesting is that these combo carts are much cheaper than buying either of the games individually. You can get this for like $5. I paid more than I should have for it, but I'll live. I said it before, but I don't have the proper equipment to make footage from older systems like the NES look all clean and crisp. It's a bit fuzzy, but hey, maybe it'll look like an old AVGN video that inexplicably fills the screen. Definitely could be worse though. Yeah, no clue why, but I've always found this little game select screen a bit charming. The game just boots up to the title screen and all the story is relegated to the manual. Now I'm sitting here realizing that I'll have to explain the story of Super Mario Bros. As if you watching don't know what it is. We all know what's what when it comes to Mario's story, but let's do this out of the sake of obligation for a proper review. And luckily I have a copy of the manual right here. This story takes place in the Mushroom Kingdom, a quiet and peaceful place full of mushroom people now being invaded by the Koopa, a tribe of turtles known for their black magic. Maybe that's why... never mind, I'll make a good April Fool's crap post. The Koopa, just the one, use their magic to turn the mushroom people into blocks, bricks, and horsehair plants. I get the first two, but this is what horsehair plants are, and I don't know how many of those there are in this game. The only one who can restore them all is Princess Toadstool, the daughter of the Mushroom King. Who? Well, she was kidnapped by Bowser, the king of the Koopa. Mario, the hero of the story, but maybe? I take back what I said a moment ago, I have a lot of questions. Clearly, since I already gave pretty much all of them, but there's something very endearing about this era of manual writing and translation. Just being able to throw out whatever sounds cool or appealing at the moment that inevitably gets changed in favor of new ideas that are more sustainable or sensible. For all intents and purposes, the story is just save the princess from the bad guys. Random things being oddly capitalized or terms that would later receive different plural counterparts is one thing, and a common one at that, but what I'm really hung up on though is this whole maybe thing. Why is there a maybe there? Is it implying that Mario has selfish ulterior motives? Is he only the hero if he defeats Bowser and doesn't die? Is it because Luigi can also save the day? I don't know. Talk of the manual reminds me, we got the classic box art to go over too, where Mario is famously falling straight into lava. This image is iconic, but it really makes no sense as a box art. Why is the fireball inside the wall? When asked if Mario was actually seconds away from burning in a Q&A before the release of Mario Maker, Miyamoto said no. Which is clearly wrong, you can see the lava right there. He was probably thinking of the Japanese box art, which is much more appealing. I used it for the thumbnail. It's so colorful and lively while giving a very good idea of the kind of game this is. Even here though, I'm not entirely convinced Mario knows what he's doing. He's jumping straight towards the water now. Well, where are you going? The princess is right there! It's Bowser. Enough sidetracking, we're actually starting now. Mario 1 has a structure that should seem familiar if you've played any other Mario game or most of any other video game for that matter. There are 8 worlds divided into 4 levels each. In each level, your goal is to get to the end marked by the flagpole while avoiding a myriad of obstacles and jumping from platform to platform. The 4th level of each world is marked by a castle where you have more dangerous obstacles and is capped off by a fight with Bowser, who is actually a typical minion in disguise in the first 7 castles. You defeat him by using the axe to destroy the bridge he's on to plunge him into the lava, or by incinerating him yourself, only to find a mushroom retainer that tells you that the princess isn't here and to just go to the neighboring castle instead. The door-to-door beatdown method ensures that you're bound to find her eventually. The structure is simple, but there's a reason it's the most universally used and understood method of designing a platformer. It's very efficient at getting you from level to level, and makes room for climactic moments as the game progresses. It's very versatile and easy to understand or make expansive without being daunting. That's part of what's key here. Arcade games would take you from stage to stage quickly as well, but the stages would either be single screens or have a small limit to their scrolling, and were generally few in number. I think that's an important thing to think about, how large this game was for its time. 1-1 alone is larger than all of Donkey Kong in terms of sheer size. While arcade levels got more out of their limited designs by having the players scrounge through the levels to try and get as many points out of them as possible before leaving the stage, Mario has a different sense of depth. With the goal refocused on simply reaching the end of bigger levels, it gave them the room to pack these levels full of unique enemies, a variety of platforming challenges, secret areas, hidden power-ups, different routes, and more things that make each level in Mario more special. When it comes to discussion of NES games, there's always a problematic clash of appealing to history versus assessing the game as it is from a modern lens. How you evaluate and weigh each of these aspects is the difference between getting a hate mob outside your window for pointing out the ways certain beloved games have aged, or defending a game with truly questionable design or mechanics, all behind the thin veil of they didn't know any better. Especially since discussion like this is proportional to the game's legacy, leading to instances where some solid games are either left with a problematic legacy or no legacy that leads to harsher assessments, and conversely, some games that clearly don't need this as an excuse because they have more sensible design equivalent to modern titles. I don't want to throw out legacy entirely. After all, it's part of the reason I'm doing this review to begin with, but I also don't want it to get in the way of me saying what I truly think about the game as is. To me, where it matters most with games like this is if it's still fun to play. Luckily, Mario 1 does hit where it matters most. This game is better designed and more fun than it has any reason to be. It's 40 years old, you may not expect it, but I fully believe it. I know it's a bit overdone, but I think one of the best ways to illustrate my point is to give a brief analysis of 1-1, the first level of the game. The level begins with you walking forward and showing you the most basic of enemies, slowly approaching you to demand some kind of action, although minimal due to it being so weak and small. The power-up is placed so intentionally that even the devs intended for it to be basically impossible to miss. You get some large jumps that contain larger packs of enemies as a threat if you fall, although fully giving you the upper hand and without the risk of any pits to kill you. One of the pipes you're jumping around can even be entered, giving you a secret and a way to skip most of the level. What this does above all else though is enable your curiosity that every pipe you see is an opportunity for a secret, and how many you find from this point onward is determined entirely by how much you look for them. The game even later challenges the curiosity with more difficult but lucrative underwater segments underneath the pipes. And if you didn't know that you could enter the pipes at all at this point, the next level introduces you to it, prompting the idea in your mind to try it in other places. While most people know about that pipe, slightly fewer know of the one-up in a hidden block, not only showing that they'll be in places you won't expect, but also giving you a choice between a shortcut and an extra life. In the second half, you get different scenarios with the obstacles you've already seen, enemies coming at you from above, but also cluing you into how you can get an advantage by going on top of the blocks, another concept the game puts to use later. More dangerous hazards like pits and Koopas are introduced gradually in controlled environments. All the while, the level retains great pacing and multiple ways to play with more routes, hidden power-ups, and a star. On top of that, a Koopa in front of other enemies to show off the shell mechanics. I think this is a greatly designed opening stage. It's not perfect, nor is it my favorite stage in the game, but it's a fantastic introduction that sets a strong standard that the rest of the game follows through on. And being able to introduce so many mechanics through the gameplay alone in a simpler environment shows to me a great understanding of what makes home console design, or at least home console design as we know it now, different than arcade design, where you're more often than not thrown into a situation and had to figure out on the fly. And here the game gently carries you along through it without making it outright obvious, which I think is very smart design. The rest of the level design follows through on being well paced with very fun platforming challenges and interesting layouts. There are a few different types of levels. Starting off are what I'll call the standard levels, not too extravagant as you'd expect, but have a very solid escalation in their design. They also vary up the aesthetics with nighttime stages and snowy stages. It's hard to articulate what makes these stages fun. There's no real centralizing gimmicks, but there is solid layout that changes up what it asks of you. Dodging flying enemies from above alongside looking for the dozens of secrets hidden in 3-1, maneuvering around tons of piranha plants in 6-2, and some stages like 4-1 even place a Lakitu at the top to throw additional hazards onto the level in a way that encourages you to run fast are fun parts of the game. In the Lakitu stages, I'm also pretty sure the controls play a role in my satisfaction. The controls here are good, but far from perfect. It is fun to run forward in full confidence and jump through the obstacles. The main problem with controls is that Mario has some heft to him, at least in a way that's different than what you're used to if you've played any of the more modern 2D entries. If you realize you're about to overshoot a jump, then it may be a bit too late to redirect even if you are pretty high up. Despite that, the lack of an acceleration cap in reverse can make you rocket off in ways that make some platforming more stressful than necessary in a way that doesn't feel intentional. Another thing is that the way Mario builds momentum is inconsistent. Sometimes you need a bit of a start and then will rocket off really far, and sometimes you'll get a good start and go practically nowhere. That said, the controls are still mostly reliable and fun to use. The run button was an interesting choice that was handled beautifully, especially since it wasn't something that was very common at this point. I like keeping the speed high with it, but you also have to let it go of it a lot and slow down every now and then, especially if you don't know the level design. Whether you prefer that style to how in the newer games you can practically keep the run button held down the entire time on your first playthrough is up to you. I don't really have a preference, it's just a different approach I like about as much. Other stages that show how fun it is to run at full speed are the cheap bridges. These levels are long bridges with fish flying at you from the bottom. They're semi-random in both placement and hitboxes for that matter. It makes running non-stop the most reliable way to dodge them and makes the bits of platforming more tense. It's especially satisfying when you can just barely avoid getting hit by them and are still going at full speed. On the other side of the spectrum, the treetop stages slow things down a lot and are more platform heavy. They have some especially solid level designs, which makes the platforming work really well and makes simply jumping around very fun. These are usually some of my favorite stages in their respective worlds. Some of these hazards and sequences like the weighted platforms and the string of falling platforms can make for some stressful but fun moments. The difficulty in this game is appropriate. It's not insanely hard, not too easy, but it's very comfortable. The difficulty scale is just about perfect. The game starts easy, but the back half gets pretty darn tricky. You have to be careful, especially due to the limited lives. Running from World 1 to 8 is more than doable on one continue, but making it through to the end requires some patience and skill. Although I don't think this game is what they would call NES hard. Also, the limited lives isn't too big of a deal for me. You start with 3, and if you lose them all, game over, back to the title screen. You can earn lives from 1-up mushrooms or by collecting 100 of the coins scattered about. There is a continue code by holding A through the game over screen, but it's balanced in the fact that it only takes you back to the start of the world. To further encourage exploration, some levels have hidden warp zones to take you further into the game. If you know the right sequence, you can go from World 1, skip to World 4, and then all the way to 8 and beat the game in a matter of minutes. In a sense, that is this game's continue feature. You don't just get another shot at what you failed by pressing a button in a menu, nor do you get a limited amount of times to retry before getting kicked back to the title screen anyway, but if you want a way back to those more challenging levels quicker, then it's on you to explore and find the secrets to get through the game faster. That's just a decision that I find genius, and one that I don't think I've seen another game go as far with the idea of. I mentioned the 1-ups a moment ago, which reminds me that I haven't talked about the power-ups yet, of which there aren't a lot to mention. This is the Mario power-up system at its most basic. Some blocks contain mushrooms that let you grow into Super Mario. Nobody calls them that. You can take an extra hit but are a bit larger. If you hit a block that contains a power-up while you already are Super Mario, then it gives you a fire flower to let you shoot fireballs to take out enemies. While some enemies like Goombas die from a single stomp, Koopas retreat into their shell where they become a potentially harmful projectile unless you burn them. And some enemies like Piranha Plants and Spinies can only be defeated with fire. You can also find the rare Star, or Starman. You know that guy, he's pretty cool. But once again, nobody calls him that. Stars make you invincible, destroying enemies on contact, some that even fire won't destroy. The enemy variety is something that this game does very well. While these ideas may seem basic now, this, for when it was made, was a large batch of creative creatures with varying behaviors. I especially like the bullet bills because they rarely blindside you, but with how fast they travel and their semi-random fire rate, they really kick up the intensity when they show up. My least favorite enemy is the Hammer Brothers. They really have the tendency to frame trap you, especially when one comes at you from the top turnbuckle. Their behavior is incredibly random, and it makes them frustrating to deal with, at least without the Fire Flower. Although their use early isn't inoffensive, they do get much worse as the game goes on. Sidestepping to the visuals, the sprite work is good at what it needs to be. There is a nice variety of visuals to match the different level types. Not a lot to say in particular, it just looks nice. Better than something like Zelda 1 to me. The soundtrack is also small but effective. Composed by the now legendary Koji Kondo, the music here is quite good and screams icon status. The overworld theme is a classic, but isn't my favorite in the game. The underwater theme has the best progression and is a relaxing, bubbly waltz. The water levels themselves are honestly some of my favorites in all of 2D Mario. Mainly because you can go fast, and your momentum is fully built and preserved as long as you don't press A while holding the opposite direction. Going through at full speed, collecting coins, going around the platforms and fish while hitting enemies with fire is a lot of fun. Water levels are usually seen as slow and boring, but this game makes them fast, risky, and exciting. The equivalent underground levels are usually some of the most dense and claustrophobic, though in a cool way that hides secrets and challenges you. These are quite solid too, and most of the world-ending castles are very fun and effective skill tests. The only main problem is that the Podoboos here are kind of random, much like the Bullet Bills, where they can jump out of lava the instant they're off-screen. This leads to hits that don't especially feel justified. Bowser is also a fairly repetitious boss. If you're small, you run under him when you get a chance to go between his fireballs. If you're big, you try to jump over him, but likely just end up damage boosting through him anyway. When you start throwing hammers, that's when it gets very annoying. The levels themselves, though, usually are fun and intense, which is what matters more. With the game cycling between all these different level types with a good difficulty curve, the back half of this game is full of back-to-back great levels. Worlds 4, 5, 7, and especially 6 are full of great levels nearly non-stop. Very little of the levels aside of World 6 I'd consider to be amazing, but it usually is really fun. The only big level-by-level issues at this point is some levels get reused with added hazards, and the maze castles. Additional hazards on levels aren't the worst thing, although levels like 5-3 would be better if it were a stage layout more built around the idea of random bullet bills coming in from the right side of the screen. Maze castles are just the worst levels in the game. You have to find the right way to navigate through an area that will otherwise repeat indefinitely with no way to tell what you're doing right or wrong. Levels like 7-4, you just have to poke around and hope something eventually works, which doesn't synergize well with the game's time limit. With there being far more good stages than bad, it makes the lengthy campaign a lot of fun. I mentioned already how big the levels were at their time, but also consider the amount of content here for an action platformer on a home console no less, which were always seen as less powerful devices that could barely play arcade games. And here we have a game that can very well take 90 plus minutes to finish on your first playthrough, that has enough challenge and secrets to ensure that you'll come back for more. This is basically the same experience I have every time I play Mario 1. I'm always impressed by what this game was for its time, and I'm even more impressed by how well the design holds up and how much fun I have with it. That all is until I get to World 8, my absolute least favorite part of the whole game. Okay, 8-1 and 8-2 aren't that bad, but I still don't like them that much. 8-1 is so needlessly long that no matter how fast I went, I was still pushing the time limit, which doesn't feel good. And in this level that incentivizes rushing, they throw huge pits with one-block platforms that are barely on screen even if you know it's coming and look for them. 8-2 is a bit better, but I find the Lakitu section at the start to be kind of annoying. There's a respawning one-up afterwards, but combined the falling Spinies with the flying Koopas on a staircase and the fact that you just have to rush to grab the one-up makes it a cool-looking section that you have to play very linearly. There's not a whole lot of variation in how to get through this unless you have a Fire Flower. You will probably die a lot before figuring out how to do this part. Also, this jump in the middle requires trial and error before you get what you're supposed to do. If you start running at the wrong point in the pipe, then you won't hit the platforms and die. Another stage that goes on a bit long too. I like the bullet bill sequences though, they're appropriately tense for this point in the game. 8-3 is where everything really falls apart. I like the aesthetic with the castle walls extending across most of the background, but this level is where they just spam Hammer Brothers. Tons of these sequences where you can only reliably make it through with a Fire Flower or by plain luck that they don't throw the hammers in the wrong place and don't position themselves in the wrong ways themselves by jumping when you don't want them to. They have such ambiguous movements where they could be jumping up or down the level, which you won't know until they've already gotten through most of the movement. There are 2 power-up spawns in this level, theoretically allowing you to get a Fire Flower, but that'll only happen if you get exceedingly good luck, especially since you have to fight a second batch of Hammer Brothers with a bigger hitbox while breaking the blocks that you have to use to fight them. You cannot jump on them. It's too risky because they can have 3 of these fast-moving hammers on screen at once, so they'll always have one ready due to how fast they all move. And you need that Fire Flower because this level ends with multiple Hammer Brothers in a row in an open field. There is no way to dodge them with any semblance of reliability otherwise. The only thing you can do is hit them before they slap you. The Fire Flower is also pretty necessary for the last level, 8-4. Another maze castle, but the biggest in the game, where the maze doesn't loop based on simply what route you take, but by which pipe you go down, meaning you have to find just the right sequence to get to the end. And as if that's not enough pain on paper, to enter one of the pipes you need to go down, you have to find an invisible block near it. Keep in mind that while you're looking for it, you're getting attacked by Paracoopas too. Either way though, that's just an evil design choice to put in the final level. Horrible design choice in my opinion. At the very end of the level though, as if to mock what I just said about 8-3 a moment ago, there's an individual Hammer Brother between you and Bowser. Not in an open field, but with a pit of lava right behind it with a Podoboo jumping out at random. Without a Fire Flower, there's almost no way to do this. So simple, bring in a Fire Flower to this stage since there are no power-up spawns in this level. So I did, and oh no, a fish hit my feet, and instead of bouncing off it, it hit me. Oh no, my jump didn't register and I got hit by the underwater fire bar. Even if you do get past a Hammer Bro roulette, Bowser is spamming hammers and fireballs while jumping randomly. This section right here, this final point of the entire game, is the reason I've never beaten this game until this review. The sheer odds stacked against you, both figuratively and literally. There are consistencies you can figure out, like that the fish will almost never hit you if you just run without hesitating, whereas the Paracoopas can't hit you if you're standing on the hidden block you have to find. Still though, I went to this level stacked with tons of lives and power-ups, but still often found myself back at the start, because once you lose that Fire Flower, then you need a good chunk of luck to make it to the end, or a lot of knowledge that you won't have on your first playthrough about enemy behaviors. Because I know speedrunners can find consistent ways to get through this, but you're not going to know how to do that on your first playthrough. And since that power-up is so important, and because there are so few power-up spawns in World 8, you often find yourself not just going through World 8 again for another shot, but back from the very start of the game. Due to the power-up spawns in 4-2, you can always enter World 8 with a Fire Flower, and then you have only one shot to get to the end with it. Having to get through the whole world pretty much perfectly highlights other inconsistencies that would be minor inconveniences otherwise. Stuff like one block of gaps having a tendency to eat your jumps, or hammer hitboxes being wacky. Even something like a bullet bill cannon firing out 3 in a row is something that I'd usually find funny even if it hits me. But with an end level already so ruthless in terms of what it asks of you at the very end, it becomes annoying that it almost certainly means you're starting over. That is, unless you're lucky enough to get an 8-3, but guess what, despite all odds, and I mean a lot of odds, that's what happened to me. The Hammer Bros in 8-3 decided to not jump me, and then I burned down everything else until I got to Bowser. Stay out of his hammer range, watch for random fireballs, and spam fire at him. Or you could damage booster, I guess it's your choice. And once you finally defeat him and hit that final axe, then you can finally save the princess. Short redhead, not my ideal type, but I respect Mario's taste. We also get a great music track to accompany the ending. The kingdom is saved, and we're gonna forget that I totally destroyed a lot of those blocks that the mushroom people were supposedly turned into. From here, you're offered a second quest. A lot of games did something like this. Zelda 1 famously did, but other games like Castlevania 1 did too. This acts as the game's hard mode. All Goombas get replaced by Buzzy Beetles, which were in the main campaign. They're faster green Koopas that change direction all the time when falling. Also, certain early game stages are replaced by their more difficult late game counterparts, like 1-3 getting subbed in with 5-3. These changes really do affect how you approach the game and certain levels. I didn't finish it, I didn't even bother trying to get that far, but is another really neat addition to bolster replay value. Despite my issues with the endgame, which I don't find incredibly hard, just irritating with how it's handled, I think that the original Super Mario Bros. Holds up incredibly well. Too much of the total experience was too enjoyable to make me say anything but that it was a joy to play through and finally finish for the first time while really collecting my thoughts on it. It isn't a game that aged perfectly, not by a long shot. It had its problems from the time it was created in. Although, what did I say earlier? Where I determine how good an NES game is in the modern day is if it's fun to play. I feel I've made it clear that Mario 1 is a game that I find very fun, because the quality of its level design is something that I don't feel has really aged, despite how much platformers have evolved in the 4 decades since. It's a game that I still enjoy going back to, and that's what matters most to me. I still think it's impressive how much it did for the industry. That said, Mario didn't save the industry. If this game didn't come out, then something else would have taken its place. So while I don't think the industry needed Mario, at a point when it needed something like Mario, he was still right there to blow us all away. That's undeniably part of what makes this game so special at all. What I think needs more credit is the absolute staying power of Mario, not as a franchise. That's obvious with it now celebrating its 40th anniversary with new releases actively coming out every year. But instead, I think it deserves credit for the varied and fun game it still is. I mean, most people already know the way to beat this game only by playing 25% of the levels and just play the game like that. But despite how old it is, I think the game is worth playing through in its entirety. Happy 40th to this game, all that's done for the industry, and for still being a fun platformer I could recommend to anybody. I give the original Super Mario Bros. An 8 out of 10. A relatively low 8. But it's still a great game all this time later, and I'm glad I could give it an analysis that I feel represents it and that it deserves.